Jenny Lawson has hundreds of thousands of fans who follow her life, the good, the bad, and the hilarious, on her blog, her book club, and her previous best-selling books. They know some pretty personal things about her life, including that she suffers from depression. They also know that she treats the moments of despair and chaos of her home and family life with humor and honesty. Now in her latest book, Broken in the Best Possible Way, Jenny Lawson takes us even further into the corners of her life. That includes the bookstore she tried to open in San Antonio just as the pandemic shut down the world, and a new treatment for her anxiety and depression. We're at home with Jenny, too, pitching ideas to the TV show Shark Tank, writing letters to the health insurance company, avoiding parties and small talk, and learning why she can never go out to talk to her neighbors unsupervised again. I talked to Jenny Lawson about her book, Broken in the Best Possible Way. Okay, Jenny, so you're an introvert. You not only took the internet quizzes, you wrote one for your book. So I'm really excited to be able to talk to you as an introvert myself. I'm glad we're on Zoom and my camera is off.
So nice.
But I'm so happy to talk to you. And I know you have so many fans out there that are glad to, and that they're so happy to be able to hear your voice out there. So, but for our listeners who might not be familiar with your story from, blogess to bookstore proprietress, can you tell those new listeners about that trajectory just briefly?
Sure. So I have been blogging since, oh gosh, my daughter was 2, so what's that, 14 years ago? And I started on the Houston Chronicle, and then I decided to have my own blog called The Bloggess because I kept getting in trouble for cursing, and I wanted to be able to use profanity the way that I wanted to. And then I had my first book, Let's Pretend This Never Happened, which was a memoir, and it inexplicably was a #1 New York Times bestseller. And then my next book was Furiously Happy, which also did equally well. And then I wrote a sort of a coloring book when I was having a bad sort of mental health time and I needed to do something other than regular writing. And that was called You Are Here. And then my latest book is Broken in the Best Possible Way, which is a collection of essays. And I opened Nowhere Bookshop. What was it? I guess 2019 is technically when we sort of opened, although we are still not really open to the public. We're like the longest running bookshop that hasn't let people into the actual bookshop. Although I will say, a week and a half ago, we finally let people in it was just for like 1 6-hour period, and it was only a couple people at a time. And there was a line like around the block of people who were just so excited. And so it was great.
Wow. So, what is that? What is your secret? I mean, it kind of defies logic. I don't know. That you that you started off blogging and it led to these unbelievably successful books, and the way that you speak to just legions of people, and it's not an exaggeration to say legions of people who want to hear what you have to say. I mean, part of it is I think you just make people feel really happy because you're so funny and so smart. Just an amazing story. And it is, I'm going to say it's a success story. It is a success story. It's unbelievable. So I'm not surprised that you had a long line around the corner outside the bookstore. I just think it's a good news story that just keeps on going. And I know that that's saying something because you deal with a lot of things that aren't so happy. But I'm just amazed at the kinship that you have with so many people out there. It's just magical. It's just an amazing thing.
No, I think it's a couple of things. I think one of the things is that I have always written about the most ridiculous things possible. And I think I was really afraid when I first started writing about just these weird things that would pop into my head. I thought, people are going to listen to that and run away. And instead, they were like, I also have always wondered why Jesus isn't considered a zombie since he returned from the dead. And then as I got more comfortable, I was able to share, some of the darker points of, depression and anxiety and personality disorder and things like that. And what was so lovely is that instead of people running away, people were like, "Oh, I thought it was just me. Like I thought I was the only one who was dealing with this." And so instead, I was able to find this amazing community of people who were all these weird misfits who were just kind and sweet and funny and mildly offensive, but not in a mean way. And it's just great.
Well, you have these two memoirs that you mentioned and the coloring book, and you share your story about depression and anxiety and other physical health issues, mental health issues. And now we have Broken. This new book takes us to a different place. That's the other thing I marvel about with your writing. It's like it's never the same story. It's never the same book. It's never the same sort of thing that you're describing. And I appreciate that. But all of your books do have funny titles, unusual titles. And this one is lighter in the parenthetical, right? But tell me about, I'm going to mispronounce it. Is it kintsugi?
I think that's how you pronounce it. Yes, it's the Japanese art of, if you say shatter a beautiful vase or a bowl, instead of getting rid of it, they would mend it. But when they would mend it, they would put gold in the breaks, in the cracks, so that the actual history of the piece, it tells the story of becoming broken and then being rebuilt. And so in some ways, the broken piece is actually more beautiful or interesting, at least, than the original, unflawed piece.
Hmm. I just love that idea that you took that idea and that became the name of this story, the name of this book. Now,
Well, and it makes sense though, because whenever I meet people and I meet them, and sometimes you meet somebody and they just seem like so shiny and happy, and their Instagram is perfect, and you just have this idea that their life is perfect and probably their house is clean, and you just think like, oh, that person's interesting in that they're sort of boring and maybe you're not even a real person. And then you meet somebody and they're broken or they're flawed or they're messed up in some way, and then they're not afraid to talk about it, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I can actually let down my guard and talk about who I really am too. So it really is that, those gold sections in the brokenness that make us unique and special.
I so see that. I mean, it becomes this interaction where the person is not their flaws. The person is the person who's telling you about something else. Yeah, I totally love this idea. And I see that as I'm from chapter to chapter in the new book, you might be talking about rats in your house.
Yes.
And I'm not looking at it like, oh, Jenny Lawson has rodents. I'm just seeing like the truer story. I mean, and that's an unfair example because there's a million other things that you share. And the same thing happens. It's sort of like, Jenny wanted to write a letter to her neighbors explaining why they shouldn't talk to her. And then I get it, right? And then I just see Jenny Lawson, being herself. I totally, totally see it. And I can imagine that this becomes such a point of connection. So everything else falls away and just the beautiful stuff is left. You're very honest and candid, well, about everything. um, but what is treatment-resistant depression? And can you talk just a little bit about this transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS, that you underwent in 2018? Because as you indicate in your book, you've tried all kinds of things on this journey and you've written about it. And we've all been sort of following this journey with you. And then there's now this new thing that seems really important in the longer story about your mental illness.
Yeah, so treatment-resistant depression is basically it's any depression where you have had, I want to say it's 5, but maybe it's 9. It's once you've had a certain number of treatments and they just have not worked. And maybe, like in the past, some medications would work, but they would only work for maybe a year or two. And so, because I have treatment resistant depression and I have tried just every medication and all of the therapies and all of the different stuff, my psychiatrist had recommended transcranial magnetic stimulation. So basically, what it is, it sounds absolutely ridiculous. It's they put this sort of a big magnet on your head, and you're sitting in this. It's almost like a dentist chair, and the magnet is working. It feels like a woodpecker is in your skull. I mean, it's very uncomfortable when you first start. You get a little more used to it eventually, but it sort of is reprogramming the neural pathways in your head. And one side of your brain is sort of where the depression lies. And that's where they go in. And then there's another side of your brain, another section that they can find where the anxiety is. And so I had treatment on both sides, one for my anxiety, one for my depression. And I think it's about 35, 40 hours total in the chair. I found it for most people, it's like a third of the people who try it, it doesn't help at all. A third of the people, it helps some, and a third, they go into total remission, which I can't even imagine what that would be like. But the fact that there are people who are, who have treatment resistant depression, who have gone through so much, and a third of them go into remission, I was like, okay, I'm in, I'll try it. And so I did, and I fell in that middle category. It helped me a lot, but it's still my depression never completely went away, but it made a tremendous difference it probably lasted about 9 months or so, and maybe a little more than a year after I had my first session, I started to get into, a real dark place again. And I had another 35, 40 hours, and that it helped as well. And honestly, if it wasn't for COVID, I probably, a couple of months ago when I was in a really low place, I probably would have gone in again and had another session because it was really helpful. And one of the great things about it, even though I didn't go into remission and it wasn't permanent and it was expensive and it was uncomfortable and it's not ideal. Nobody wants to deal with it. But what is so wonderful is I love the idea that there are these options out there, that they're continuing to learn. And even from one session to the next session, they had learned just in that 1 year, because they'd had so many people who had gone through. They were like, oh, we've learned that, actually, if you do it like an inch back from here, this is going to be a little better, or this is going to help. So I don't know, it just gives me a lot of hope that we won't always have to listen to the lies that depression tells us.
Yeah. You kept a diary, and by day 7, you said you felt good the first time. And good enough, you said, to go to a museum, and importantly, I think, to listen to music. I was so struck by both of those, but especially the idea that now you felt you could listen to music. And you also cried, which was a good sign that something was working. And I was just stuck on those ideas about, especially the idea about music. And also that that it puts you in the mind to be in that space, getting this treatment of wearing a fascinator. I mean, it's like everywhere there's a joke. I mean, everywhere there's something funny. There's some banter with the doctor that has me on the floor, laughing. So anyway.
Yeah, it is interesting. I've had a lot of people who have read my book who, don't deal with mental illness, or maybe they have, like a friend or a family member who do, and so that's the reason why they read it. Or some people just read it just because they like the funny parts, and they're just like, okay, the mental illness is weird, but that's I'm happy to read it, whatever. But I always think it's interesting, people who haven't necessarily dealt with depression, when they were like, oh, well, you cried. That doesn't sound like a breakthrough. Like that seems like something you'd be doing the entire time you have depression. And, everybody has it in a different way. But for mine, my depression is just an utter numbness, like an uncomfortable, terrible, just feeling absolutely nothing. And so that's the reason why I would never listen to music whenever I had depression. And it didn't even really dawn on me, that it was so uncomfortable to listen to music and have this cognitive dissonance of, I should be feeling an emotion with this song, and then I wouldn't. And so instead I was just like, okay, well, I guess it's just true crime all the time, because I can always listen to, and they found her torso later in the sewer.
Oh, no.
And I'm like, that matches my mood. Okay. So yeah.
I read this op-ed in the New York Times this week about the idea of languishing. And languishing means it doesn't have to do with feeling good or bad. It means feeling nothing. And it was written by Adam Grant, a psychologist, and he was differentiating languishing from depression. And he talked about how we have to pay attention to what is the opposite of what he called flourishing. And that is what languishing and depression do have in common. And he cited this statistic that kind of stopped me in my tracks. He was drawing actually from the work of another person named Corey Keyes, who's a sociologist at Emory University. And he said, depression will be the number one cause of burden to every country in the world by 2030. This is from the World Health Organization, a prediction from them. And then he also said, but this does not have to be the case. And so the idea of languishing, as they were writing about it, was during the pandemic, like there's this new kind of terrible, ennui to the nth degree that people are feeling. But that statistic about the number one cause of burden, and it's a weird word. I mean, it's a weird phrasing, I think, to parse. But I suppose it has to do with the idea of seeking care, or of being, or not being able to flourish, or not being able to live your life in a certain way. But that by 2030, it will be the number one cause of that, of the things that keep us from going to our jobs, or keep us from working, or keep us from interacting with our loved ones. And so it made me think about your book and the ways that your book can break down the stigma. And I'm sure you've heard this before with each of your books, but I think it's worth repeating. I think it's worth saying again, especially if the incidence is going to be this stratospheric. This prediction is terrible. So I'm thinking about this idea of what your book can do to help us along. I mean, if this is it, if this is the prediction, I think people who don't realize that, no, you don't necessarily cry through a depression. That's not a sign. I just think it can go such a long way to help people understand, even if they're laughing through it, to help people understand a lot more. And you mentioned this cognitive dissonance of watching a comedy show and not being able to laugh and not being able to find things funny.
It's, and I think it's kind of interesting, because I think so many people have, because we are in this weird liminal space of, of semi isolation. And, so many people, I think, are, some of them for the first time, understanding what it's like to deal with, with sadness and ennui and, anxiety on a larger scale. And I think in some ways that can be really wonderful because it increases our level of compassion. And I think it helps people to understand. And although that statistic is scary, in some ways I find it a little bit of a relief because I think that so many people are already suffering who have not gotten a diagnosis or, can't afford to get the medication or, don't want to deal with the stigma. Um, I think actually in a way, it's kind of wonderful that we can look ahead and say, this is going to be a real problem. And if it's going to be a real problem, we need to have a solution, because it's very easy, if you love somebody with depression or if you have depression or you're bipolar or anything like that, you already know how much you want to find, you want to find a cure for it, you want to find the right tools in your toolbox to make yourself continue to work through it. But unfortunately, most insurance companies do not necessarily feel the same way. And so, unfortunately, if we can get companies to understand, actually, your people would be so much better off if they were, given the ability to be mentally healthy, to find the right kind of medication or therapy. And then if we can continue to look for, more and more, um, opportunities to find things that may work. I mean, I talked to my psychiatrist, I guess it was a few weeks ago, and I was like, I just got vaccinated, so I can leave my house now. I'm, finally fully vaccinated, and everybody else in my house is, and so now I feel like I can leave my house, and I'm still struggling. And I heard about ketamine treatment, and I remember when I was in college, ketamine was like the drug that you took at a rave, and I never did because I was like, that's a horse tranquilizer. That seems like something dangerous. But now they're like, actually in small doses with a doctor, in a clinical setting, it can be really helpful to help combat depression and treatment resistant depression in particular. And she was like, yeah, absolutely. And I can tell, and here's the clinic, and I've got patients who are doing it right now. And so in some ways, I think it's it's sad and upsetting to know that so many people are dealing with it and that it will probably continue to get worse. But it's also uplifting to know that there is so much more education. There's so many more people who are now comfortable with being out about it. The stigma, compared to even 10 years ago, is so much better. That, before 10 years ago, if I had said, oh, I have anxiety disorder, there probably would have been a lot of people around me going like, oh, I don't know what that is, and that sounds scary to me, and maybe you should go sit over there. But now when I say I have anxiety disorder, 90% of the time people will be like, oh yeah, my aunt has that, or my daughter has that, or oh, okay, yeah, I understand. No worries. And that's so great because then we can feel comfortable being human, and we can feel comfortable saying, hey, I have anxiety disorder, so I actually can't do this thing, but I can do that thing. And then you find out that other person saying, oh my gosh, I do too. And actually that works better for me too. And then it gives them permission to go to somebody else and say, I mean, like, for example, during my book tour, it was all virtual, and it was fantastic because I didn't have to leave my house. I didn't have to worry about how it was going to affect my mental health. And I felt really bad because I was like, I'm not going to be traveling. I'm not going to be able to see people. But then there were thousands of people who showed up on my virtual tours who were like, I've never in my life had the chance to see you on a blog tour because my anxiety is so strong. There's no way that I could have traveled or I could have left my house. And so I don't know, in some ways, I think that this whole COVID thing has, some terrible things have come from it, but some great things have come from it that make me just want to say, can we keep some of this? Like, can we keep some of the ability to say, hey, let's cut everybody some slack. Hey, let's find new ways to do things. Hey, let's find different goals and understand that we don't all have to look alike.
Oh, I totally hear that. Yeah, I hear people talk about the silver linings all the time, but I would say that this would definitely be looking on the brighter side of COVID for sure.
I
And
mean, yeah, one of the things that the Mayo Clinic, they do these different, like, where they have people come in and they give speeches and they talk to their doctors and they, do different things. And they had asked me before to come and talk about what it's like to have an invisible disability. And I would always say, I can't, because I have an invisible disability and it's anxiety, and that's why I can't. And then this year, for the first time ever, they were like, you know what, we're doing it virtual this year. And so I was able to do it. And not only that, but other people were able to do it. And it was amazing and wonderful. And and even the people who were throwing it, who do it every year, they were just like, I can't believe we never thought before about the fact that, we're talking about disabilities, and we're like, a healthcare institution, and we never really considered the fact that even, dealing with disabilities, that there are certain disabilities you need to work around, where the virtual thing makes it easier.
yeah, well, I'm thinking about the chapter called the Things We Do to Quiet the Monsters. You mentioned that the stigma of mental illness is shifting and that you have support and medication and treatments, and you acknowledge these privileges that you're grateful for and that you know that others don't necessarily have, even though it's not been that easy a road for you and your family. And then there's this chapter called An Open Letter to My Health Insurance Company, which the first line is, sometimes I think you want me dead. And I feel like, yes, maybe wherever we are in terms of our health, maybe we've all felt like we could start a letter to the insurance company that says, I know you don't want me to have healthy gums, or I know you don't want me to wear decent glasses, or et cetera. I was just struck by both of those chapters in the sort of the larger work of your book. And you're always sort of thinking about not just your own specific story, but sort of the outreach to others who can learn from that. Those were very eye-opening chapters for me, stories for me. You're also really good at coining words and making up these funny phrases that we somehow all understand in the context of the work. For instance, in The Things We Do to Quiet the Monsters on page 85, you mention reverse Fonzie. And I knew what that meant. And you didn't have to explain it. But I never would have thought to to put those two words together to describe something. And you also, in Eclipse, Not the Twilight Book, The Other Kind, which everybody needs to read and see the pictures, you talk about lawn gerbils. And so in any other context, I would be like, lawn gerbils, what's that? But in this context, it made so much sense. But I have to say, too, you have an actual word. It is tintinnabulation. And I, like you, in a different chapter where you describe listening to, I'm trying to remember what the word was, but the British pronunciation, and then of a woman's voice, and then the male pronunciation, and how your husband comes out of his office and says, "What's going on out there?" Because it sounds like they're talking to each other. But anyway, I did listen to the pronunciation online of tintinnabulation in this gorgeous essay that you wrote about collecting buttons. And it's a very different beat. It's a very different moment in the book, but it of course it's seamless, and it's there, and it's Jenny Lawson. But I just want people to remember what a gorgeous writer you are. You're not just funny, and you're not just sort of sharing this story and writing these sorts of letters about health insurance, or teaching us about stigma, or teaching us about TMS. But I've got to say that essay just knocked me out.
Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, you made my whole day. It's really nice. I'll write a chapter or an essay, and then I'll think, does this fit? And what I have learned is that nothing fits and everything fits. I mean, books are just like people. They're just made up of, whatever pops out at the moment. And, for a long time, I was like, oh, I should be only funny or only serious. And what I've realized is that your audience is remarkable in being able to take a million different things. And so, giving myself permission to be, vulnerable or funny or weird or slow or whatever it is, it's really lovely that people stick around for it. And I always have to remind myself, I'm like, okay, I'm not for everyone. Like, not everyone is going to think that I'm funny or interesting, but the 10% of weird people who are going to read this and go, oh my God, I found my people. That's who I'm writing it for. And so whenever I start to doubt myself and go, oh, this is too weird, this is too, then I'm like, you know what? There's probably somebody out there who thinks they're too weird, and they're going to find me and they're going to be like, I found my people. So yeah.
Well, I want to ask you about two things I have not talked about enough with my friends because of the pandemic: shoes and diets. So this hilarious essay. I mean, I hate to say, it's so funny, but because it's it's the result of everything that you're dealing with. But this losing your shoe, Thelma, your left your left shoe. All your left shoes are named Thelma, and all your right shoes are named Louise. And
exactly, they go together.
They go together. That is, everybody needs to, who hasn't gotten this book, everybody needs to read this book for that, and for I Am a Magpie, of course, and for the essay on the cockchafer.
So. Yes. It's what's funny is so often people are like, why do you come up with your ideas? And I'm like, have you read my book? Because they're all ridiculous. All the stories are like, I found a bug on the ground and it was doing crunches and I embarrassed myself in front of the neighbor. I mean, none of them are like, I saved an orphanage. They're all these just absolutely ridiculous, mortifying moments. But the mortifying, ridiculous moments, those are the ones that people love. Those are the ones that make you go, oh, you're a real person, and now I have permission to be a real person too.
That's exactly right. That's exactly, and the way that you weave it, I don't know how you do it. It's like it's the eclipse, and then it's like it's this totally other thing where you have the box on your head, and it's just the best.
Yeah, and then the cat's in the trap, and then them trying to catch the rats, and then it's a little nuts. I considered reading that chapter during when I did readings on my virtual tour, and I was like, holy crap, this chapter is so long and ridiculous and goes off. And I was like, I'll just read like these 3 pages, and I'm like, no, because it just ends in such a weird. I'm like, no, okay, well I can do the middle part. No, and I was like, no, it just has to go all by itself. Yeah.
I can just imagine people in their, in front of their computers at their houses with their headphones on and nothing else, going on at home, and just like laughter ringing out, and everybody, thousands and thousands and thousands of homes. I just think that's awesome.
What was so great is because like normally I go, when I'm recording the audiobook, I go to New York and they have me in like this fancy studio, and there's the producer there and the director there and all that stuff. And it's always just terrifying and really just it's not my cup of tea. But because of COVID, they were like, okay, here's what we're going to do. You're going to record your audiobook in your closet. And that's how we're going to do it. And it was fantastic. It was great. It was just me in my closet. And I've only listened to a little bit of it because I don't like the sound of my own voice. But it's gotten really good reviews. It's on the audio's on the New York Times list. But there's all of these where you can hear my cat, Hunter S. Tomcat. You can hear him like purring and meowing, and my dog Dorothy Barker. You'll hear her off, and so I mean, in a way, I'm like, okay, maybe this is unprofessional, but people love it. They're like, it's like I'm in the house with you. I'm like, oh, you are in the closet with me. You are literally in my closet with me for 6 hours.
I think all your audiobooks should be recorded in your closet with your animals from now on, forever and ever.
Me too, 100%. I'm not going back. I'm going to be like, nope, COVID's here forever. And they're going to be like, really? Because it's not. And I'm like, nope, it totally is. And I'm still wearing the mask, and I'm just going to stay home. And although I will say, today, for the first time ever, so my parents are here. I haven't seen them since 2019, but we are all fully vaccinated, and everybody in my house is vaccinated. And so I get to see them for the first time. And today we are actually going to eat in like a restaurant for the first time in 14 months.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, it's just, I'm a little anxious, but I'm also, there's part of me that's like, what's it going to be like? Like, do you remember restaurants?
Wow. Well, I hope you guys have a great time. That sounds wonderful. That sounds wonderful for your parents too. That's
oh my
wonderful.
gosh.
So you'll get reacclimated, and then pretty soon, it'll be great.
Yeah, it's a slow process though.
Yeah.
It's that, I love that there's so many people, at the bookstore that I own, everybody there, we've all had our vaccinations, and recently I was there, and they were like, we actually could take our masks off. We're all fully vaccinated. We all, use the right socially distancing, and we all, and I was like, could we really? And we took our masks off, and I was like, this is sinful. Like, this feels so naughty. Like, I feel like I have just smuggled in 8 pounds of cocaine. Like, this is, so yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, Jenny Lawson, thank you so much for talking to me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. This was fun.
Jenny Lawson is the author of Broken in the Best Possible Way. This has been Book Public from Texas Public Radio. Write to us at bookpublic@tpr.org. Jacob Rosati composed our theme music. Kathleen Creedon is our digital producer. Dan Katz is Texas Public Radio's news director. I'm Yvette Benavides.